their own separate enclosures. In actual fact, everything here, the covers for the lights, they have little light emblems so that you know that this is how you change the bulb. This is the water windscreen wiper fluid filler, and you can see that there are emblems all over the car. Things are clearly marked. There's labels telling you what everything is. And it's interesting that Mercedes engineers were refused, point blankly refused, access to inspect the wreckage of the car which was carrying Diana. And I believe that's because if you were to drill any new parts into this engine, if you were to add anything at all, an experienced Mercedes engineer would immediately be able to detect that there'd been a modification. And even somebody without any specialist Mercedes mechanical training would be able to tell that these specifically designed components, which are all constructed and laid out in a very, very logical manner, even somebody with a mild amount of mechanical knowledge would be able to detect a part which should not be there. And that is why I believe that Mercedes engineers have been refused access to the wreckage to this day. And their offer was refused immediately after the crash, and still for the last 10 years the wreck has not been given over to Mercedes. Well, I've driven this Mercedes for nearly 2 years, and when I saw the photographs of the crash blown up so that we could really analyse the wreckage as it was photographed by the world's media as it sat in the tunnel before it got whisked away, I just found it difficult to believe that the metalwork, the very, very thick metalwork that this car is made of, would just fold up like a crisp packet. I mean, there's obviously a very big difference between this S-Class Mercedes and something like a Renault Twingo. And the reason that people pay a lot of money for, you know, the S-Class Mercedes and Range Rovers and Bentleys is because they want a lot of, you know, robust construction around them as they're driving. People pick these cars for the safety aspect. And my feeling is that the Mercedes was weakened. I feel that the structure of the Mercedes was probably partly drilled, partly sawn through across the roof section and across the bonnet area there, and that I don't believe that the impact was, you know, 100 miles an hour or 100 kilometers an hour even. I think that the impact probably took place when the car was running at maybe 45, 50, 55, 60 miles an hour maximum. Now we do know that the Mercedes was stolen several weeks before, and that if you know, the various reports vary that you read, but apparently one of the doors was removed, and the microchip which manages the electronics for the engine system was also taken, was also stolen. Well, those chips can be bought on eBay, and various Mercedes parts companies make those chips available. It has a retail value of about £120. Now, it makes you wonder why somebody would bother stealing the car at gunpoint while there was somebody driving the car in the centre of Paris just to steal a £120 microchip, which they could buy from eBay. Well, I'm actually sitting in the same position that Diana sat in when she left in the Mercedes from the rear entrance of the Ritz Hotel. And according to the official Lord Stevens report, the seatbelt was jammed in the retracted position. Now, this is a luxury vehicle, and the seatbelts are actually tailored and have their own conduits which they travel in, and I find it impossible to believe that the seatbelt was jammed by pure accident. My feeling is that this is a highly engineered vehicle, and that somebody tampered with the mechanics of the vehicle, and also they deliberately jammed the seatbelt. In actual fact, right up until the moment of impact with the 13th pillar, no one in the car was wearing a seatbelt. Apparently Trevor Rees-Jones may have used his seatbelt at the last minute, allegedly. And unfortunately, Trevor Rees-Jones has been, really not a good resource of information about what was going on in the Mercedes. There is one comment which alleges that he said once that he doesn't remember much about the journey in the Mercedes, and he hopes that he never does remember. So we had 4 occupants. You had Henri Paul at the wheel.
Yeah.
He didn't have a seatbelt.
No.
Trevor Rees-Jones sitting next to Henri Paul in the front passenger seat, and he didn't have a seatbelt on.
No, the stories up until very recently were that Trevor Rees-Jones was the only person wearing a seatbelt at the point of impact. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt all the way through the journey. We knew that because that's standard bodyguard procedure anyway. He shouldn't have been wearing a seatbelt. But the stories until recently were that in the last few moments before the crash he managed to get his seatbelt on, and he was the only one wearing a seatbelt, thus he was the only survivor. Mm-hmm. But actually it's come out in the report again that even Trevor Rees-Jones wasn't wearing a seatbelt, so nobody was wearing a seatbelt in that car.
And you can clearly see Dodie is leaning over, presumably looking out the window at the motorcycle paparazzi. Now, if he did have a seatbelt on, he wouldn't even be able to lean over that far.
No, indeed.
Okay, so the only sole survivor, shall we talk a little bit about Trevor Rees-Jones?
Trevor Rees-Jones.
What's Trevor Rees-Jones' background?
Well, he came from the elite parachute regiment, we know that much, and he joined Mohammed Al-Fayed's security staff on leaving the Paras. Mm-hmm. And he was one of Mohammed Al-Fayed's security staff on the night of the crash.
Now the Paras are sort of known as a kind of elite kind
they
of.
They are an elite, one notch below perhaps the SAS. You know, they're the elite of the actual army. Yeah, for sure.
Now, is it true that Trevor Rees-Jones says that he remembers nothing?
Yeah, it's true that he says it. Well, he's had a couple of flashbacks, but it might as well be nothing. He remembers being followed by a motorbike, he said. One or two little bits, but irrelevant, really. He remembers virtually nothing, yeah.
Now, there's a book that's been published that carries Trevor Rees-Jones's name on the front cover.
Yeah.
But it actually, the authorship is actually attributed to another person.
Yeah.
Now, I've read that book, and one of the interesting things is that out of the very, very tiny fragments that he does remember, he does actually say that if Henri Paul was speeding at a ridiculous speed, he would have said to Henri Paul, I think you're going a bit too fast. And
Absolutely.
according to Trevor Rees-Jones, that car was not going as fast as the mainstream media told us. So
Yeah,
could
indeed,
you just
yeah.
sort of tell us what this whole situation was with the speedometer
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the speed?
I mean, it's interesting because, yeah, Trevor Rees-Jones has said that. He said if he'd have noticed similarly about Henri Paul's alleged
Drunkenness.
inebriated state, yeah, he would have noticed and he would have said, these are trained bodyguards, you know, they're trained to observe people's behaviour,
Yes.
whether they've been drinking, whether they haven't, whether they're driving too fast. You know, this guy was driving the Princess of Wales and Dodie, who was Trevor Rees-Jones' personal charge that night. So he would have noticed and he would have got on Henri Paul's case if he was driving recklessly or too fast. But with regard to, what was the other question that you were saying there?
The speedometer.
The speedometer, that's right. The stories that came out immediately after the crash, virtually the next day, plastered all over the British press anyway, was that the speedometer had been stuck. It jammed on 192 kilometres per hour on impact. Now, Mercedes...
That's very fast.
Well, it's very fast anyway, but that's a fact. And but nonetheless, Mercedes cars are made in such a way that the speedometer always reverts to zero. It never jams on 192, or it never jams at any particular speed. It reverts to zero on impact. It's like the airbags coming out. An impact will send the speedometer back to zero. And again, with Lord Stephen's report, we've now we've found, discovered that indeed it did revert to zero. So this whole story of the speed of the car being the speedometer, yeah, exactly. It was all planned to show, I believe, to show the evidence suggests that was the media ploy to create this character of Henri Paul. He was drunk, he was driving way too fast. Look how fast he was going. The speedometer stuck on that speed that he was doing.
Yes.
It's nonsense.
It's nonsense, and we know that that's not true, mainly due to the things that Trevor Rees-Jones has remembered. He remembers that Henri Paul was, you know, just acting normally.
Yeah.
There's never been a suggestion from Trevor Rees-Jones that Henri Paul was drunk.
Absolutely. Not quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. He's made it very, very clear that had Henri Paul been in any way drunk or incapable, there is no way, and not just Trevor Rees-Jones. Trevor Rees-Jones' partner on that night, Kes Wingfield, the other bodyguard.
Yes.
Both were in the bar with Henri Paul in the hotel lobby. They were with him all evening once Henri Paul returned back to the Ritz Hotel. For the 2 hours prior to the crash, both of them have said quite clearly, if we thought at any time Henri Paul had been incapable through drink, we would not have let him get behind the car, behind the wheel of the car.
Mr. Alpine, what do you think of the revelations in today's Daily Mirror that in fact Diana thought that Prince Charles was trying to have her killed?
Yeah, but I'm always saying this from the beginning. That is the head of the royal family. And I suspect not only Prince Charles, but without Prince Philip, who is a racist at the core.
What evidence do you have for that, Mr. Alpine? There's a damning allegation.
No, but I'm saying it, I'm not worried. I'm saying it all the time, from the beginning.
But what evidence do you have for that?
The evidence is already been detailed in the application which I made in traditional review in Scotland. Right?
Can you tell
Most people, like